Hello. Ooh, that's so loud. Hi, everybody, and welcome. We're going to get things started. Um, my name is Amy Andrews, and I'm the children's book buyer here at City Bookshop. And we're so excited that you all joined us tonight. Thank you for coming in person or tuning in on our live stream if you're joining us that way. We do have a full calendar of events and book clubs here at East City, and tonight I really want to highlight our book clubs for young readers. We have a Page Turners book club for readers ages 8 to 11 and a Between Reads book club for readers ages 11 to 13. We also have a teen art club for readers ages 12 to 18 who get special early access to upcoming young adult titles. If you're interested in any of these book clubs, or if you know a young person who might be interested in any of these book clubs, please ask a staff member for more details or find more info on our website. Some quick housekeeping. Number one, if you need a restroom, it's upstairs past the cash registers and greeting cards. Number two, if you're watching from home and have any technical difficulties, let us know in the chat. My colleague Lainey Rose is monitoring that and can help you. Number three, we will have time for questions tonight, both in person and virtual. So think about your questions. And if you're joining us virtually, you can put those in the Q&A function and Lainey Rose will ask them on your behalf. And finally, and most importantly, if you need to purchase a copy of the book tonight, we have copies available. They'll be upstairs at the register. They are all upstairs and not on the shelf. So you can buy those before we do the signing line at the end of the evening. We are so lucky to be John's local bookstore, not least because I had the pleasure and privilege to read an early copy of Breaking into Sunlight that John brought me in the fall, and I've been raving about it to anyone who will listen ever since. This book is so beautifully written. The story is so moving. The characters feel so real to me. I'm still thinking about them months later. John writes about all the complexities of a family dealing with addiction with such honesty and sensitivity and grace. If you know me, I usually describe my taste in books as anything emotionally devastating, but ultimately uplifting. Uh, and that describes this book perfectly. It's one of the reasons I loved it so much. I'm excited for you all to read it, and I know that you're going to love it too. I'll let John and Laura talk about the book, but I do want to uh, just introduce them. So our conversation partner tonight L.M. Elliot was an award-winning magazine journalist in Washington, D.C., before becoming a New York Times bestselling author of historical and biographical young adult novels. Her works include Under a War-Torn Sky, Suspect Red, Hamilton and Peggy, Walls, and Bee and the New Deal Horse, have won the Scott Odell, the VLA Cardinal Cup, and the Grateful American Book Prize for Historical Fiction, and have been named NCSS CBC Notables, Bank Street College of Education Bests, and Kirkus Bests. And now, the man of the hour, John Cochran, grew up in Kansas City and studied journalism at the University of Missouri-Columbia. He worked as a reporter and editor at daily newspapers in Missouri, Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina before moving to Washington, D.C. to cover Congress for Congressional Quarterly. The National Press Foundation recognized his work with its Everett McKinley Dirksen Award for Distinguished Reporting of Congress. That's a mouthful. He now lives on Capitol Hill with his wife and children. Breaking into Sunlight is his first novel, and it doesn't say this in his official bio yet, but it should. The novel got a starred review from School Library Journal and was an Indies Introduced pick for summer and fall 2024. So now, please welcome John and Laura. Woo!
Facilitate. I'm just here to facilitate John telling you about this extraordinary book of his. So I'm going to prompt him with a few questions, but first off, just congratulations. This is a beautiful book. As Amy said, it's an exquisite exploration of all the challenges and the heartache, but the hope and the real power of friendship and understanding to help a family heal. It's beautifully done. And as Amy was saying, you guys probably know, I think they're neighbors and friends here. John was a journalist for a long time. And one of the things that, and I was too, one of the things I really admire about this book is something that I know I did with the Washingtonian magazine, which was to take a large issue, but then humanize it by telling the story through someone who actually had to live the ordeal and make the choices. And eventually, hopefully, not only survive but thrive. And you do that so beautifully with this book. Can you talk a little bit about? I mean, it would seem a natural thing. I'm sure you've had older colleagues saying, "Why didn't you just write a nonfiction book? And why didn't you just write like a longer narrative piece about it? Why do it as a novel? What gives you what does that augment in the story?"
So the inspiration to write a novel for kids actually predates this story. I was inspired by a book called Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DiCamillo, which I found as an adult and read. It floored me. I mean, it reminded me how kids literature can be really profound and really beautiful. And she writes with so much grace. And so that really, before this story appeared, that was the goal. I think writing it as a novel for kids, and I'd be interested actually to hear if you have any thoughts on this as a journalist yourself. I think it allowed me to get into the child's head and into his perspective for a sustained period in a way more effectively, I think, than I could have done as a journalist, and really tell it through his eyes. I think also kids are perhaps maybe more likely to pick up a novel um, and feel as if they're immersed in the life of this kid and really can feel his problems and what he's going through in a way that they couldn't with a piece of journalism. Not that journalism doesn't do that effectively. Um, as you said, you pick a subject that um, encapsulates an issue that you're dealing with, and you tell it through their eyes. But I did feel as if it got me into his head in a sustained way that journalism maybe couldn't have for me.
That's a really interesting point. One of the other things that I can tell you must have been a really good journalist. Um, as a reporter, you spend so much time following people around and listening to them and absorbing what they're doing and saying. Your voices are so beautifully authentic and believable and differentiated among all your characters, which actually is harder to do you all than you would know to make each of the characters sound different. Talk a little bit about how you did that.
I felt actually pretty strongly about that. I think that was one of the ways one of the things that irritates me is when you hear English professors saying they don't think journalists can write fiction. They always have to write in, a very staccato sort of telegraphic style. I do think that being a journalist, listening day after day after day to people speak, searching for the right quote, trying to capture, who they are through their language is great training for a fiction writer. I think that was one of the things that I actually found. The transition to fiction was particularly writing a novel was more difficult than I really appreciated going in, but I thought that um, dialogue actually came fairly easily for me. And in fact, when I get stuck, I often on a blank page just start writing dialogue, which helps me kind of get unstuck. Um, and I did spend a lot of years in North Carolina listening to people speak, and I did try in this story to capture um, the voices of people in North Carolina without getting kind of corn pone. You often see, you know what I mean, those kind of, and I hope I succeeded at that. But I felt strongly about, portraying their voices accurately and respectfully, clearly.
Yeah, no, you really, really did. And you did avoid the stereotypical corn pone is a great word for it.
Y'all is about as close as I
Yeah.
can get, but yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, one of the other really lovely things about the book, and I'm sorry I'm getting off tangent here, but just following on what you say there, that I really loved is I could really see the river and I could really like smell it and feel it. And it was clear that you've been there and why have the river?
It is inspired by some trips I took, particularly with my wife in North Carolina, on rivers very much like the river in the book. And there's just something so special to being on the river in a canoe, and the way, particularly these rivers in North Carolina, the way the world just drops away and you seem as if, there could be a subdivision right over the trees, but you feel as if you're miles and miles away from anything. And it's so important in the book. That's where the kids at the center of the book, Reese and then Meg and Charlie, who he meets, that's where they disconnect, and that's where they connect to each other and process what's going on in that sort of piece of the river. And the river, originally when I wrote the book, the river wasn't in it. They were walking along
Oh.
railroad tracks, which was, in one of the early drafts. And actually, it was my daughter who read an early draft and very wisely said, there needs to be more kids. There needs to be more time of, with kids alone working through this stuff. At that point, it was really dominated by Reese, the boy at the center. It was really dominated by his interactions with grownups. And my daughter said, more kids. And she was right. And then to give them a place to go, that was, that was better than the railroad tracks, perhaps a little less dangerous. That was when the river, appeared. And it's based partly on the Lumber River, which I don't know if there's a friend figure from North Carolina, if she knows it. Which my wife and I took a really wonderful canoe trip on, partly based on the Casheye in northeastern North Carolina.
Mm.
And then just it kind of itself too. I think it's not based on rivers. It's not a specific river.
I also have the experience of having these kind of amazing children that have been both my muses and my inspiration and my best and hardest editors. So you also mentioned at one point, I hope I won't embarrass you with this, but that Meg has some of your daughter.
Yeah, I mean, so I love Meg, and yeah, there is more than a little bit of
Is this okay?
More than no, it's not okay. Okay,
Sorry.
there is more than a little bit of you of Marin, my daughter, in Meg, and I added Meg to the story also because of Marin when she read through that first draft and said needs to be. But there was really only there was Charlie and there was Mr. Smith and there was Reese, and so I added Meg. And yeah, and Meg, I mean, Meg is she's hurting and she's lonely when the story begins, but she's smart and she's caring and she's really strong, and very empathetic. So yeah, there's a lot of Marin.
And I'm sorry, I jumped right into the heart of the novel. I'm going to back up to a bigger picture for a second, but I want to come back to how important those minor supporting characters are to Reese's journey and how they make all the difference. But we'll come back to that. Let's back up a minute to the whole idea of having large issues and telling it through the experience of one person, the beating heart that you worry about and you take the journey with. Talk about the statistic and why of kids living with addiction within their families and why it's so important to try to show them and what they go through.
Yeah, so it's the study actually now, the most recent study is actually fairly old. It's from 2017. And so the problem has not gotten better since then. But the estimate at the time was that 1 in every 8 kids has a parent at home with a drug or alcohol problem, which if you think about it, which means, in any classroom, chances are really good that not just 1 kid in there is dealing with this, but 2 or 3 kids are dealing with this. So if you are not one of those kids, chances are really good that one of those kids. Yeah. And so a big goal of this book is to try to break the silence around that issue, because kids and grownups who are dealing with this can feel so alone. There's a lot of pressure on kids out of fear and shame to not talk about this and hide it, which is a terrible feeling for a child. And I think, as I say in the author's note, I think, I say to kids, once you start talking about this, chances are really good that the problem is so common that you're going to talk to people who say, I've been there too. Either I've dealt with this myself or I, have a family member who's dealt with this.
There's a wonderful, and I'm not going to be able to paraphrase it well tonight, but there's a wonderful quote from E.B. White about finding answers in books and finding not only yourself, but also learning empathy for others. I think, John, you'll do tremendous. This is an important book, you all. He's gotten a starred review in the School Library Journal saying that it's important to have this book in libraries. And it's because, and I will tell you that in my journalistic days at the Washingtonian, one of my main beats was writing about mental health. And there's so much written about the people who are going through the ordeal, the person who suffers with the disease. Not enough is written about the family members who are uprooted and have to deal with it and are also trying to help the family member get better. So you've done a tremendous and important thing.
Well,
You
thank
really
you.
have.
One of the reasons I felt strongly about it too, and I was thinking about it a lot as I was writing it. So when I was you talk about kids finding solace in books or finding the answer in books. So when I was in fifth grade, my family moved to Kansas City. We were from Pennsylvania, and not too many months after we moved there, the very first friend that I met was hit and killed by a car on his way to school.
Oh,
And this is probably like 5, 6 months. And there was no count. This was in the late 70s. There's no counseling offered at that point,
yeah.
right? We went to the mass and that was it. Um, but not long after that, I found Bridge to Terabithia by
Um,
who's also Catherine Patterson is also a DC area,
mhm.
Montgomery County writer, which is about, I was in fifth grade. It's about a fifth grade boy who loses a friend in a sudden accident, in a drowning. And that book was so, I mean, I just found it on my own in the library, but that
Yeah.
book was so important to me. I mean, it made me cry, but it also, I didn't feel as alone because I was reading about this other kid, a boy my age, who was going through this. And she shows him moving forward, and that,
Right.
like, seeing another kid moving forward in that way, I mean, it was super important to me. So
Well, you do that with Reese. You really do. It's beautiful. We can walk the journey with him and see how he gets through, which leads me back to the other question about these incredibly important supporting characters that have their own traumas. So just I know that one of John's the theme of finding help in friendship, the healing power of friendship and no nonsense kind of friendship, nothing. One of the other things that's so lovely about this book is how kind of honest and heartfelt, but matter of fact in its presentation of this is the way life is and this is how these characters are living. It's really tremendous. But you deepen that whole theme of the importance of friendship by adding a parallel tragedy in your supporting characters and what they're going through. Can you talk about that a little?
yeah, so the kids that, so when the book opens, Reese, the main character, is very closed off, feeling very alone. He's not talking to anyone. And he ends up meeting two other kids, Meg and Charlie. And Meg and Charlie have been uprooted from the DC area and brought down to their grandparents' farm after their parents were killed in a car accident. And the biggest parallel I saw there, and it's what Reese realizes as the story rolls along, is that tragedy has blown a hole through the lives of Meg and Charlie in the way his dad's addiction has blown a hole through his life, much the same way. And it's connecting to them, and then also broadening his empathy and his understanding that he does share those connections with other people. That's part of his journey toward realizing that he isn't alone, and it also is part of Meg. Meg and Charlie, or Meg in particular, are pretty closed off when the story. They feel very alone, and they're closed off when the story begins. And I think they realize they make those connections as well.
Yeah, it's really beautifully crafted and woven. So, how was that? Did you enjoy doing that? There's a lot of characters. It's a lot of emotion to deal with. I mean, that's supposedly different from what I say supposedly what we did as journalists. Right?
I mean, that was one of the things that was difficult for me, I think, in making for me making the transition. I don't know how you felt about it, from journalism to novel writing. Just all these strands and all of the often it was there being too many possibilities rather
Right.
than too few, like
Yes.
and every time you choose one path and other things fall away and you have to go back and I did. I mean, the story really came alive when Meg was added, because
Okay.
she's the same age as Reese, and just her personality is just so it in that sense the story became easier, I think, to write when she appeared. Um,
Well,
but it is difficult to follow all the threads. One thing that was interesting at the end of the book, after I'd written it, and it was being edited, I was writing the author's note, and I reached out to a group called Luna Network, which works with kids who are dealing with addiction in their families. And they have a camp called Camp Mariposa, which kids can go to. But they also, on a parallel track, they run programs for kids experiencing bereavement, because they saw the same connection. And that was wonderful to talk to them after the fact
that's great.
and realize they, also saw that connection
Yeah.
between the two things. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so I have two things, and then John wanted to do a reading for you. I think we're getting close to that time, but I will share with you that he's exemplifying something Mark Twain said about the difference between writing nonfiction, because he was a journalist as well as a novelist, right? And he said that they're really not all that different. It's just that writing novels is harder. Fact is stranger. He's one of those people who said, fact is stranger than fiction, but that fiction is harder to write because fiction has to make sense.
Yep.
you,
I never heard that.
you
That's
have
not
to
good.
pull
Yeah.
all the threads together. With journalism, you can just say, I'm just reporting the facts, ma'am.
Another journalist actually once described it to me as he was talking about shorter form journalism is like paddling around inside a harbor, and then a novel is like bobbing around in the middle of an open ocean, right? And trying to figure
Yes.
out your way forward.
Yeah, where the horizon is.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
Well, hopefully a novel will have a point, right? And an embedded parable in it that's not obvious, but it's there. And
Right.
you certainly do that. You also do something else that I've always remembered. One of the things that Jack Limpert said to me at the magazine was that, Laura, if people are reading, they're thinking. Don't tell them what to what to think. Don't write something beautiful and then say, and what I mean by this is, and it's really, really true with teenagers. They do not want you telling them what to think. And you walk that line really beautifully too. Maybe it's because of your kids.
Well, and I also think that and it's maybe why writing children's fiction can be difficult, is I think they know if you are not being straight with them,
Oh,
or
yeah.
trying to hide the ball. And I think that's one of the reasons why I feel it's really important to just be upfront about these things and not and it's relative. I mean, it's handled in an age appropriate way, but I don't really pull any punches, and I didn't want to pull punches because I want kids who are experiencing this to see themselves so they don't feel that they're alone, to feel seen, and then also help people around them understand what these kids are going through and understand the dynamics of addiction in families, because they need understanding, they need support.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that kind of leads into something that we had talked about before that I know you want to talk about is, again, one of the, and as somebody who has written a lot about mental health issues, I have to tell you that I was reading along, oh, well done. I see what you're doing there, because he was showing us the journey of getting to healing, without letting us know for sure that they were actually going to get there, which is, that's a hard line to walk. But talk about, you told me that there's something called the seven
Seven
C's.
C's, yeah. So, and that was actually a really important moment. So this, for me writing this thing, there's something called the seven C's, the letter C, which was developed by a guy named Jerry Moe, who's a counselor and a writer. He works with kids who are dealing with addiction in their families. And I think you also hear it in Al-Anon, but and it's something that kids are told to, to say to themselves, hopefully internalize to help them deal with what's going on. And they are, I didn't cause it. I can't cure it. I can't control it, but I can take care of myself by communicating my feelings, making healthy choices, and celebrating myself. And the seven C's. So when I sat down to write this, I did do research into sort of what was the best thinking out there about how to help kids deal with this in their families. And I found the seven C's. No one in the story ever talks about the seven C's, because I didn't feel as if these characters, I didn't want it to sound like a therapeutic brochure. But the seven C's definitely guided the plot. It helped me understand where Reese's head is at, the main character, when the story begins, and where he's headed to. And most importantly of all, it helped me understand where the hope is. I mean, that was the hardest thing. Like, I think if I'd written a story where the dad at the end is magically, free of his addiction and everything's fine, uh, you know, that's not being fair to the kids who are dealing with this, because that's not how these things play out. And the hope very much lies in Reese making these connections and then internalizing the seven C's. It's one of the reasons, I don't want to give a spoiler, but it's one of the reasons why Reese's birthday is so important. It keeps popping up in the timeline, his 13th birthday, because that's very much about the celebrating myself aspect of that. And certainly when the story opens, he's behaving as if he can, in a kid-sized way, control his dad's addiction and cure his dad's addiction. And he's not communicating with anybody. He's not even with his mother. He's just completely shut down.
Well, that's what they think, right? I mean,
Yeah.
really is. And it's not like Reese doesn't stumble along the way, which is well done too, because it's not an easy trajectory. at all to work to these kind of realizations and to try to get a loved one to health and to
Well, I was going to say, and it's important. It was important for me to show, these characters are not doing the right things all the time. They're saying the wrong things sometimes because they're just normal people groping their way forward. And they yell at each other and they yell at the dad. And Reese is angry at his mom and he's angry at his dad and he's shutting down which is all part of the roller coaster ride that they're on. So.
Well, another really nice thing that you did, and then he does have this lovely reading to give to you. I have two things to say. You do such a nice kind of and use this term too in some of your other interviews, a light touch to the hard realities, right? One of the things you need to do when you're writing books is that you can only sound a bell once, maybe twice. If you keep ringing it, or you really go for the most difficult, the most dire over and over again, you're going to lose your reader. And you do all of this really like with the pitch perfect. Lovely. No, it's really, really lovely. And I have to say too, that even with all this very honest and realistic storyline that he's giving you, I really do love your metaphors, both with the river and the idea of having to get up out of the water and to get up to sunlight again. It's really lovely, which kind of leads into something you might want to read.
Sure. And if I'll try to do this while holding a mic, I'm not really sure how that's gonna. Oh no, I think I'm. Let me try. It's okay.
I got it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I've done this before.
This is a scene that appears at a point in the novel where Reese has begun to tell himself that his dad is just going to get it together and his family's going to be fine. And he goes out on the river with Meg, and she takes him farther than he's ever gone, to an old abandoned settlement. And on their way back, it's a great day. And on their way back, they come across something called a trot line, which is strung for catfish, and it has bleach jugs as floats, and the hook lines are hanging off the bleach jugs. And they see one of the bleach jugs bobbing dramatically, and so they canoe over to look, and that's where the scene begins. That's where my reading begins. It was a turtle. From the river's black water, it looked at them sideways with one dark eye. Sticking out from one cheek behind its beaked mouth was the wicked-looking barbed end of a fishhook. The turtle had swallowed it. From the hook's shank, heavy fishing line ran to the bleach jug. Meg leaned over to examine the turtle and whistled. That's a big old snapping turtle. We had one come up in the yard a while back. Charlie found it. It might have been this one. Without thinking, Reese reached out to touch it, to try to help, but Meg leaned forward to put her hand on his arm. Stop, she said. Keep your hand away from him. He'll bite. He'll bite through your finger. I want to help, Reese said. I know that, but he doesn't, especially when he's scared. He'll try to bite you. Charlie got too close to the one in our yard and tried to touch it, and it snapped at him. It just missed his hand. My grandma screamed. Reese looked around as if there might be someone else who could help, even though obviously they were alone. He asked, what'll happen to him? I don't know. Even if we could get a hold of him to get the hook out, we'd probably get bit. We could maybe cut the fishing line, but with that hook in his mouth, I don't know that he could eat. He'd probably starve to death. We can't just leave him here, Reese said. I'm sorry, Meg said. Sometimes I guess there's nothing you can do to help. Staring down at the hooked turtle, Reese wished that he had gone past without looking so he wouldn't have had to see this. He felt as if he were about to cry, which was ridiculous. The turtle sank into the still black water until only its eyes and the end of its snout broke the surface. He looks worn out, Reese said. He turned to Meg, and she blinked and looked away. She looked like she was about to cry, too. Then he made up his mind. He reached into his pocket for his buck knife, the one his dad had given him, and he pulled out the blade. Rising a little from his seat, he reached quickly into the water, took hold of the fishing line as close as he dared to the turtle's head, and put his blade to it. The canoe tipped. What are you doing? Meg asked. Alarmed, she started to rise too, and the canoe rocked more. Whoa, Reese said. Hold still. Sit down. I'm going to cut him loose. He had to saw and pull to break the line. The turtle thrashed, churning the water around it, snapping blindly as Reese worked. Then with a pop, the line broke, and the turtle dove immediately. It disappeared into the blacker depths of the river. Reese and Meg watched the water until the last ripples had faded away. Reese asked, do you really think he's going to starve? I don't know. He looked tough, though, and we gave him a chance, right? I wish you would have let us help him, Reese said. I wish you would have let us take the hook out. Me too, Meg said. The water was still again. It was a smooth, dark mirror reflecting the trees and the sky and the clouds above them in inky tones. Reese thought of the turtle's eye staring. In that eye was no sign at all that the turtle understood what was happening to it. There was nothing but glassy green and yellow, and in the center, the black pupil like a bottomless hole. Reese leaned over the edge of the canoe and looked into the water, trying to make out the turtle, but he saw only his own face reflected back at him.
So I think, do you all have some questions you would like to ask this amazing author? Do you have any from online? Okay, I'll keep plugging away at you then.
Sure.
Do you want to talk about Charlie?
Sure. So Charlie is Meg's older brother, and Charlie has Down syndrome. And he's important to the story because he deepens it in a couple of ways. First off, Reese realizes, as I said earlier, one of the big parts of Reese's journey is broadening his empathy and understanding his connection to other people. And he realizes in the course of the story that one of the things he shares with Charlie is a need for understanding, a need for dignity, a need for respect. And it's also through Charlie, ultimately, that Reese does what his dad in the course of the story is not willing to do, which is stretch himself outside his comfort zone to make things better. And there's a point with Charlie where Reese makes some bad choices and lashes out and alienates Charlie and alienates Meg. And Reese has to use his art talent in a way that he had not been comfortable with to try to make things right. And it was important for me to show, as part of Reese's journey, to show him taking that sort of brave step that, again, that his dad, at least in the course of the book, is not willing to make for himself. And it's through Charlie that Reese takes those steps.
It's really nicely done, y'all. Any questions?
Thank you very much. In the book, the question was, what am I most proud of in writing the book? Finishing it, I guess, would be the I do. It was the hardest, and the hardest part of talking about Reese almost crying. For me, the hardest part of this journey was really getting into Reese's head and writing him as an authentic 13-year-old. And I was going to give her a shout out, but a great children's writer who's here, Catherine Marsh, helped me with that early on in an early draft because helping me understand how to do that on the page, which was not coming naturally when I started. And probably 70% of the revision process really was deepening Reese, making him feel authentic and getting his voice out. Because initially, I think the story, sort of wandering away from your question, but the story of the adults took shape first, and Reese was kind of a witness early on, and I wasn't in his head, and that took some doing, and so I'm proud of it. And I'm also, and I probably enjoyed it the most. I am proud of the scenes on the river, because it's a part of the world I really love. Eastern North Carolina is a part of the world I really love. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and I really enjoyed writing those scenes, and I really enjoyed putting the characters there. And I feel as if I did some justice to the place. So, but thank you for.
Set out to write a young adult book, or did you set out to write an adult book? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the question was, did I set out to write a young adult book or an adult book initially? It was, I mentioned because of Winn-Dixie earlier, when I read that and it took a little while to sink in, but after reading that was the first middle grade book I picked up as an adult and read. And it took a little while to sink in, but at a certain point, I even before the story appeared, I was telling myself if I could wave a magic wand, like and do anything, I would love to write for kids. And I think and I really love middle grade. I like people sometimes get down on middle school kids. But middle school kids, I love middle school kids. They're still kids, but they're wrestling with like lifelong questions like these. They're that, and it's terrific to listen to them and talk to them. So I think I felt fairly strongly early on about writing for middle school kids. Um, and middle grade fiction, there's some just it takes on like because of Winn-Dixie, just takes on just such deep, important questions. And I wanted to kind of be affiliated with that. That was that. So yeah, so I did not, although the story is very much inspired by my own family experiences with addiction, which came as an adult. And that was one reason why I circled back to really look into, what's the best thinking about how to help kids and what's the best thinking about what they're going through. That's why the 7 C's were so important along the way. And I didn't paraphrase the question. The question was doing research, talking to kids who have been through this experience themselves. Um, I was drawing on my own personal experiences as an adult, but then definitely, but then channeling it through Reese. And a big part of that was I'd come across that statistic early on about the 1 in 8 kids. I think that uh, it, it just that was when I realized it's important to talk about this for kids, and it's important to get it out there and try to break the silence.
One of them being, what is your fiction writing strategy? Do you set aside a certain number of hours per day? Do you fully outline the story before you start writing? Do you do a lot of research, et cetera, et cetera?
So that was one of the big challenges moving from, I don't know if you felt this, moving from journalism to fiction was developing, I mean, a lot of the skills transfer, but it coming up with, particularly if there's not if it's a debut story and you're writing it entirely on spec and there's not an editor on the back of your chair, like bouncing, like, give me that copy, how do you motivate yourself? And for me, how do I get into that space where, ideas are kind of bubbling up? A lot of it is talking through problems in the story with my wife Kelly in particular. If I get in a tangle, just talking about it, what if, and her throwing out ideas. There's a scene with a car crash that was actually was her idea in the story, um, and it was much less dramatic in my original version. And free writing helps a lot when I'm hung up. I do that for writing dialogue, just laying down dialogue if I know uh, basically the point I'm driving toward and what I want the scene to be. I think having the characters talking, just because dialogue does come relatively easily against other things.
I'm just going to keep answering, but I pulled a quote that I love from Anna Quinlan, if you all know who she is. She was a columnist, Newsweek columnist, and now writes exquisite novels. And and you did this so well, which is why I wanted to include it, which I'm not going to be able to find here in my notes. She basically says that dialogue and the way people speak, untidied up, is the greatest character reveal that there is in many ways.
Yeah,
and that dialogue can serve, one sentence of well done dialogue can serve the purpose of a page of exposition and description. I think that's really true. And you do the dialogue. So, I mean, it's so dialogue heavy, in the best possible way. I mean, it's really in the best possible way.
Well, and journalism, that's very true. I mean, you're looking, they talk about the killer quote, right? The quote that really nails the point, right? And so
but you have it repeatedly. And that scene that he read is the distillation of so much of everything that you're trying to show with the book. It's really well done.
Thank you.
There was a gentleman in the back. Ah, a young reader.
Yes. Oh, was that the end of this? Was what I read at the end of the story? No, it goes on, and in fact, that's kind of where it starts to get kind of exciting. That's where it really, things start happening. Dramatic things start happening. Sure. Thanks for the question.
You have another question, which is that if this book did just come out, but do you have plans for another children's book, and what are you currently working on?
Yeah. Oh, the question was, do I have another book in process? And yeah, I'm working on another middle grade novel with a boy at the center about homelessness. It's set in the Pittsburgh area where my mom's family is from, where I lived for a while as a boy. It's about half done.
By the way, just so you know, actually, I'm so glad that he is focusing on middle school kids, because actually just finished writing a column for School Library Journal about the lack of books written specifically for 6th through 9th graders. Their kids older and their kids younger, there's not that much. And boys, it's great because there's not enough written where the boy is the protagonist. So
I do.
well done. And thank you.
Thank you. There is a little bit of Bridge to Terabithia, which I mentioned earlier in this book, and that it has a strong boy character and a strong girl character. So and I think that book is read by both boys and girls. I certainly read it as a boy, so I'm hoping, yeah. But you're right. I mean, and that was one of the things that yeah, and in fact, the editor I work with at Algonquin Young Readers, Cheryl Klein, that was one of the things that she in talking about the next book, she very much wanted another book with a boy at the center. So
no, I know this because I have a lot of my novels are boy protagonists, because the first one was a World War II book, and there was a long time that I was known as the boy writer, and boys were really kind of worried when they met me, like, where's the author? so it's really, they don't always see themselves represented, particularly that wonderfully gawky, yearning, awkward, trying to find themselves age. So it's great. Was there not? Yeah, there you go.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about addiction, and specifically, when you finished this book, was there another story in you about this topic? Because I know you did a lot of research, and you have some personal experience that inspired it, and I'm just wondering if there was, either with Reese or with just another kind of story itself, that you feel would be important to tell about this subject, because it is so central to what's going on in so many people's lives.
So the question was if there's another book about these characters are about the issue of addiction in me, and there isn't right now. And actually, somebody else asked me in the last couple of days if it was hard to leave these characters, which is also sort of similar. And I do feel as if I have left Reese and his mom in a good place. And I feel as if they've gotten to a really strong place, and that they're going to be okay. I think and so I did feel sort of done when I got them to that spot. I mean, the thing that is sad is I actually thought about this quite a bit. I don't know that the dad is going to be okay, right? And I think that's important in the story, that Reese has to find a way to move forward, even though he doesn't know that his dad is going to be okay, and get out of the shadow of the addiction. But boy, there's a lot more to be written. I'm actually a little surprised that there hasn't been more written for kids about the opioid epidemic in particular, because Reese's dad is addicted to opioids, because it's just such a monstrous epidemic that so I'm certainly hopeful there'll be more written for kids about this. All different angles, and kids from all different places, and
so you did the proverbial, you filled a hole in coverage, right?
Yeah, there you go. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
journalism term. Yeah, we are.
And it's really important.
There is a book called it's a graphic novel. It's really wonderful, called Hey Kiddo. Do you know Hey Kiddo? And do you remember the name of the? Yep. And it's about whose mom, it's about his relationship with his mother, who was a heroin addict. And it's an awesome book. It's really well done. And it's a different kind of experience. His mom was, there's so many different angles of this to write in that I think kids need to hear about. That was a situation where the mom was very much absent, which is often a real issue. In fact, there's a terrific story in the New York Times over the last couple of days about a mom who had come back from addiction and had been absent for about 25 years from her kid's life. So there's that, and trying to find her way back in, right? And then there's instances like I wrote about where it's right there and it's really present. And you don't know if your loved one is on the way up or on the way down, or,
One of the other scenes that was so sensitively done was Reese's embarrassment at the school when his dad showed up high, and I think that's something sadly probably all of us have witnessed at some point, some parent coming to a game or something that they're clearly not all with it. And you can just see the child wanting to just sink into the ground, and you handled that again really, really nice.
The dad's been absent for it's fairly early in the story. The dad's been absent for some number of days after a blow up and after an overdose. And the dad shows up limping with a black eye, which is mysterious, right? I mean, the dad doesn't really say how it happened, and Reese is, and I think this is something, and it goes to what Reese feels about his dad. He's overjoyed to see his dad and so relieved that he's okay, because he's been so afraid for him while he's been gone. But he's terrified of a scene, right? Of all this falling out in front of everybody at the school. And here's his dad with a black eye, and then his mom comes and she's about to cry because she has, he just doesn't want that scene. And I think that's it's pretty emblematic of where Reese is at, and I think kids dealing with this are at, where they love their parents so intensely, and they're so angry at them about what's happening. I think at the havoc that it's wreaking.
The juxtaposition of those two.
Yeah, right, rubbing against each other. Yeah,
you do it really nicely. So.
Thank you.
It's just, it unfolds so naturally. I just really like the way that you sort of take us on this journey with this family, and it's just so easy to get to know the characters so quickly and just get invested with them. And I think that I was getting a little bit worried about how is it all good. It's messy, and it is messy, and you have this. You're not afraid to let it be messy, because it's not going to be all tied up in a bow at the end. And so it's just reading the last couple pages just now, and I'm so grateful for the way that you did it.
Thank you very much.
Exactly the right balance, and it's okay to be unknown. Like that might go this way, might go that way, but I can't say enough good things about how much of a really lovely journey it is to go.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful to hear.
There's so many lessons in it without being preachy. It's just put it out there. So the only thing I was going to ask about was the title.
Yeah. So where did it come from? And so the scene that I read, I originally had chapter headings, which were removed at a certain point, and the scene with the turtle, the turtle is the hooked turtle is meant to be a metaphor for the dilemma that Reese faced with his dad. And with that chapter was called Hooked, and the book was originally called Hooked. And I didn't love it, and somebody along the way said it sounds like it could be like Peter Pan, or like, what is this, and I guess there were a lot of books out there called Hooked, and so they were looking for something. The editor at Algonquin Young Readers was wanting me to find something different, and the phrase "breaking into sunlight" was in the last chapter, and it's the river is very important, and the river is very deep and it's very dark, and there are a number of scenes where Reese and Meg in particular are sort of floating in between the sunlight and the dark below. It's kind of emblematic of where they are in their lives. And in the end, it's a hopeful ending. And I said he was down below and he broke into sunlight. And that was as he rose. And as I thought about that as a title, I think there's a sense of moving into sunlight, moving into the light, which Reese's eventually does, and there's a sense of having done that through a certain breaking, that there's things that are breaking in his life, and he does emerge into the light, into hope and good news. And then the editor, it was the right decision. She felt it was a little too on the nose to have breaking into sunlight appear at the end of the book, and so that was removed from the book, and now it's just the title. So, but he does still break into sunlight. It just doesn't say it. No, no, it was. I think it was the right decision.
No,
but
I'm teasing.
yeah.
Well, actually, how was the editing process?
The editing process was great.
Yeah.
Cheryl Klein was the who Laura is now working with on her next book, who's terrific. I really felt lucky to work with her. And she's written a book on writing for kids called The Magic Words, which if anyone's interested in writing for kids, it's a great book. And actually when my agent sent it to the manuscript to her, I started reading her book, and I was like, I really want to work with this person because I really liked what she was saying and in the book. I did feel as if the journalism experience again helped a lot. I think you're having to make a lot of, as a journalist, daily journalist, or you're having to make a lot of decisions very quickly, and you're having to not let your ego get in the way. You just have to let stuff go if it's not serving the story. And I think that that definitely held me in good stead. You don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Just let it go.
Well, everybody needs an editor, and Cheryl's a really good
And
one.
Cheryl improved the book immensely. I mean, it really is. She asked lots of great questions and identified holes, and yeah, so it was good.
Great.
Which is, if you could visualize a safe space for a kid to sit and read this, would it be by a river? Would it be in a library? What would be a perfect setting, you think, for a kid to sit?
It's interesting. So the question is, what would be the perfect setting, perfect safe setting for a kid to read this? I guess it would depend on the kid. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier, a place like the river, or it could be a park, or it could be the woods. I think there is a sense of kind of the world dropping away and you can process things in the silence of that space. And I think that would be a great place to sit and think about this. And I really love libraries, and I've always loved libraries. So I could see that as sitting in a comfy chair under a window in a library and reading this book. I think it'll also be just the stillness and the quiet.
You've also created a safe place in the novel for them to go, especially if they're experiencing this.
Oh, yeah, I'd hope so.
You've created a place where they can find and say, oh, yes, this is how I feel. And it's okay. And this kid has dignity, and this kid has agency, and this kid is trying so hard and actually going forward. So if they can't go to the river, and if they can't go, they can go to the book.
And there are actually, and I hope kids read it, there are resources at the end of the book. And a little bit of the author's note is a little bit of a talk to the kids about my own experiences, about not being alone. Here are resources you can go to.
Well, I hope adults will read it. Put it in the hands of adults as well, you guys.
Yeah, and I thank you for saying that. I think I really do hope that I wrote it with the hope that adults and kids would read it, and I would love it if adults and kids read it together and talked about it. And I read a lot of, there's so much powerful writing in middle grade. I just
best. What are you talking about?
and so I read tons of middle grade and always have. And yeah, so I'm hoping adults read it as well.
Well, I'll also, because it's completely, adults will love it as well and learn and be moved by it as well. It's also for these kids who are going through this. I will just tell you from my own personal experience and the writing that I did, the having an adult who actually notices something's off with that kid. Are you all right today? Can make the world a difference for a child who's going through something like this. So
yeah, it's really true.
Your book can do that for adults as well. So. All the way in the back, last one, maybe.
How would you envision an adult having read the book and maybe having an awareness and knowledge about a child who may be having a similar experience in their family? What would that process be to maybe provide the book to them, and what the follow-up would look like? How would you advise someone?
Yeah, and I hope they would give the book to that child. And I hope, and I say this in the author's note too, if that's a trusted grown-up, I really hope that they can, I mean, if they do it through the book, that's wonderful to make the point to the child that's going through this, that they're not alone, that they hopefully can see something of themselves in this book, and then also urge them to talk about it, if not with them, but with someone, with a friend, with a teacher or, someone that they do trust. And as I say in the author's note too, I think, and I might have said this earlier, it's such a common problem that they're really likely to bump into people who will say, yeah, I mean, I've been through that too. I know exactly what you're dealing with at some stage of their life. And then it was the question about sort of uh, research into how kids are dealing with this. The dynamics are so similar across age groups. That feeling of powerlessness and fear and being alone. And I think the difference with kids is their world is so small, and they're when they're dealing with when this is happening to a parent, this is their world. Um, so
You might want to give it to the school counselor.
yeah, that's a
You
good
know,
point,
if the
right?
counselor has the book and it's something that they could then use as a prompt to encourage the child. But, school counselors are good resources for any parent, any adult who engages with a kid who might need some help. So it's a
Yeah.
delicate thing, but it'll be a real lifeline.
And I also, yeah, and there are often I've seen it. Just individual teachers often have such tremendous relationships with kids where they're just individual kids, and that would be great if it happened there as well.
Which is, what books are you both currently reading and loving and what?
You want me to do this first? It just
Sure, yeah.
His. Catherine Marsh has written so many extraordinary books. I have yet to be able to get to Medusa. It's on the top of my reading list. It's wonderful. But her, The Lost Year is an extraordinary novel about Ukraine, and maybe Catherine could talk about it, but I would definitely read that one.
Yeah, no, I second that. And Catherine's book, Medusa, the Myth of Monsters, is her latest, and I just read it, and it is a terrific book. It's a middle grade book. It's and I know as a writer how incredibly hard this is. It is really accessible, really propulsive, just action packed, will really hook kids, but it has some really important stuff to say as well. Hopefully Catherine will describe this right. It's a feminist twist on the Medusa myth. And it's an awesome book. It really is good. And I'll mention Laura's book too, if I have it here, which I loved as well, which is Bee and the New Deal Horse, which is another by Laura. It's a middle grade book as well, and it's set during the Depression on a struggling horse farm in rural Virginia. And it's interesting. It has a connection to this neighborhood with the bonus marchers, because the bonus marchers make an appearance in this book, marching through this part of Virginia, and the bonus marchers camped about a mile that way when they came to DC on Anacostia, and I think about them a lot when I'm down there biking, and there's a marker down there. But that also is a terrific piece of historical fiction for kids. And I'm also it's not out yet, but I'm reading a book by Stephen Banbury called The Pumpkin Princess and the Forever Knight, which is also middle grade. It's a really good title, and it's a really fun, and it's kind of it's an adventure, but it's also it's kind of cozy, kind of a cozy adventure. It's kind of a celebration of fall. And that's a cool book with, yeah, I wish I had a title that great. That's an awesome title.
Titles are hard.
And can I give a shout out to one other awesome writer who's here, Jennifer Howard, who is the author of Clutter and Untidy History, which is memoir, also meditation on our relationship with stuff, often unhealthy relationship with stuff, which is I read it 3 times, and I got something different from it every time. It's an awesome book, and is rooted inspired by an experience that I think many of us have had or will have, dealing with a parent's stuff, right? Clearing out and simplifying. So it's a beautiful book.
Well, Thank you so much, Laura and John. That was so great. Thank you all for joining us tonight in person or virtually. We are now going to transition to the signing lines. If you need to purchase a copy of Breaking into Sunlight or Laura's books or Catherine's books or Clutter by Jennifer Howard, I believe we have everything. Everything that was just mentioned is in the store right now. You can purchase those upstairs. And then if you are willing and able to fold up your chair and kind of just put it to the side, so we'll clear out some space here. We'll get a table in here and we will start the signing line in just a couple minutes. Thank you so much. Woohoo.